do one deck by one, right here.
As we're about to begin the service, request that those who may have cell phones on, if you'd please turn those cell phones off or make sure that they're in silent mode. We have come together sharing our sorrow to bid farewell to Ieda Warshay. We recall the blessings of her life. We thank God for all that was good and true in her life, and for the precious memories which shall endure. Eternal God, Creator, merciful Parent of all, your children bowed in grief seek light to dispel the dark gloom which threatens to overwhelm them. Be gracious to those who mourn, for they are in distress. Bless them with your compassion. Ease their burden of sorrow. Send them light and peace, for it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will sustain you with my power." And let us say, Amen. This time it's my honor to call upon Cantor Misha Pisman from Park Synagogue for the recitation of Psalm 121.
Shir HaMachalot Esahein el Harim Mehayin Yavo Ezri Ezri Mehim Adonai Os Hashamayim Vaharetz אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שמרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן, שומר ישראל. אדוני שומרך, אדוני צלך, עליית ימינך, יומם כשמש לא יכך, וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד העולם.
And now, my honor as well to call upon Rabbi Helruden Luria and Cantor Alyssa Rosenbaum from Congregation B'nai Yeshurun.
Mizmor David, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bin ode sheyarbitzeni, al mei menuchot, yenaleini. Nafshi yeshovev, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, leman shemo, gam ki elech begait zalmavet lo irara, ki ata imadi shivtecha umishantecha heila yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai, shulchan neged zorerai, tishanta vashemen roshi, kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yedefuni, koyemei chayai, ve'shavti beveit Adonai le'orech yamim. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, Adonai ro'i lo echsar.
And please join me together in Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He guideth me on straight paths. He restores my soul for the sake of his glory. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the sight of my enemies. You anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just on behalf of all of B'nai Yeshurun, our staff, our clergy, our leadership, and our members, we extend our deepest condolences to the entire Warshay family. Ieda really felt like a part of our own home through Susan and Jay and their children. And I think it says something, Erev Pesach, when we're all so busy, to have so many here. It really is because the type of people that Ieda, along with Marvin, were. So committed to community, so devoted to each and every congregation, and every action that they did was filled with kindness and with caring, really the highest Jewish values, and we're going to miss that, and I know we're going to honor that every single day as we remember Ieda.
As Rabbi Rudenloria mentioned, it is, of course, Erev Chag, right before Passover begins. So there are a number of changes that take place in the service, and I'll mention those briefly as we approach them. Among those are that we're not really supposed to give a eulogy, and this is actually not something that happens just Erev Pesach, but the entire month of Nisan. The rabbi said the joy of the community over our celebration of the Exodus from Egypt outweighs the mourning, the grief of individuals and families. Be that as it may, this morning we won't have any eulogies. Instead, we'll just have some remarks from the family. I'd first like to call on Ieda's brother, Lenny, who has some thoughts to share.
All right, thank you. I have to say I just have a few words here. And I have to say that I'm very proud to pay tribute to my sister Ieda with words of respect and with words of love. Ieda, I'm sure that you will continue to set a proper example for those who follow in your footsteps, really. You are a wonderful example of a wonderful Jewish woman and a wonderful human being. Thank you. Let me get this. I'll get it.
And now we call on the Ieda's children, Danny, Elisa, and Susan.
I get it. Being a people person has become a cliche on a LinkedIn profile. It's a safe answer during a job interview. I suspect you would all agree that in so many ways, Mom was the rare, actual people person. As a people person, my mother studied social work as both an undergraduate and graduate student. Among her study materials, I recently found detailed instructions for leading a wide range of organized activities, mostly for children. These were some of her favorites. In her category of quiet games, paper bag dramatics, and spinning yarn storytelling. Candle races in her mild active category. An indoor scavenger hunt in active vigorous. As Susan and Elisa and many of our friends can also attest, our birthday parties boasted the most organized, interactive, and memorable party activities. She planned them for days, and she led them in ways that she knew all the people at our parties would enjoy. When over the last few weeks, my high school friends, some of whom are here today, called me about Mom, they reminisced about how she always treated them less like a random friend of mine and more like another member of our family. A friend just recounted that just now. When Mom asked them how they were doing, she not only listened closely to hear their answer and really hear it, she remembered how that answer related to the last answer they had given weeks before. She cared about them, and they never forgot that. In 1985, when my parents and sisters visited me while I was studying in Israel, we all went to a reception at our hotel. My mother wouldn't hear of us walking in without a proper introduction. And so just as we entered, she announced loudly and with pride, "Hi, we're the Warshays." I seem to remember Susan, Elisa, my father, and me rolling our eyes a bit. But my mother looked so satisfied that now all the other people at the reception knew who we were. Ever since then, "Hi, we're the Warshays" is a frequent refrain anytime someone in our family does something quirky, which, if you know us, does happen occasionally. In 1995, 10 years later, Deb was pregnant with Gabrielle, our first child, and my parents' first grandchild. Thinking back about how we shared this news with my parents is one of my favorite memories of Deb's and my interactions with them. It was a few weeks before Hanukkah, and as an early present, we gave my father and mother a silver picture frame. By the way, gifting silver picture frames became a family tradition. This particular frame had a few subtle decorations in a clown and baby theme. Dad was excited to see me and Deb and to get a gift from us, but the theme of the gift kind of eluded him. Always the perceptive people person, my mother homed immediately in on those decorations. "Thank you for the lovely frame. Might those clowns hold any special meaning?" she asked with a glint in her eye and a knowing grin on her face. In her long career as a social worker, Mom worked with the entire span of age groups. Teens at the Jewish Community Center, seniors at Jewish Family Service, and for many years, those of all ages grieving a loss as the head of the Park Synagogue Bereavement Support Group. As we now mourn her loss, I'm sure a clear irony is not lost on any of us here today. How much we could benefit from Mom's wise, sensitive, kind support from her as a people person whose love we all grew so accustomed to. Mom, we will miss you and miss all the ways in which you supported us.
Here I am on the afternoon before Passover, and instead of calling my mom to find out where her Miriam's cup is and if she'll share about it again at this year's Seder, I'm trying to find the words to share some of the many amazing things about my dear, beloved mom. Passover was actually one of my mom's favorite holidays. For years, she and my dad hosted a beautiful Seder. When it got to be too much for them, Jay and I took it over, but we still partnered with my parents to put on the family Seder together. And until several years ago, when it got too difficult for her to stand for long periods in the kitchen, my mom still contributed by cooking some of our Passover favorite recipes. Last week, when we were fortunate enough to get a day when my mom was somewhat lucid, she told one of the ICU nurses that even though she was not allowed to have anything to eat or drink by mouth, she would be going home for Passover and was going to be enjoying the Seder meal. She was not going to miss it. On her last evening in the hospital, just 2 short days ago, we started singing Passover songs. My mom had been sleeping all day, but she opened her eyes and seemed to be listening. I guess she decided that was her Seder this year, because just a few hours later, she took her last breaths. My mom may have been tiny in stature, but she was one of the strongest and toughest people I've ever known. My mom was a fighter, and never give up was pretty much her mantra. 4 years ago, my mom ended up in the hospital for an extended time and ultimately ended up having open heart surgery to replace a heart valve. It was 2020, right in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Hospital rules allowed only one person to visit, and that was me. I was the only one who could be with her in the hospital. I became her personal coach and cheerleader, encouraging her to push herself and not give up. I even wrote her a set of positive affirmations to read aloud each day. She worked so hard to regain her strength. Not only was she determined to get out of the hospital and go home, she also wanted to get off of oxygen, to drive again, and to walk with a cane rather than a walker. While she wasn't able to realize some of those goals, she continued to push herself. She walked the halls in her apartment building, eager to do just one more lap, timing herself to go just a bit faster. I watched the same determination when, just as she was starting to gain strength, she fell and fractured a bone in her hip. Every time a health issue arose, my mom was determined to find the right doctor and find a cure. Never once did my mom ever say, well, I'll just have to deal with this. She always believed there had to be a way to make it better. Despite everything she was dealing with health-wise, my mom was still incredibly organized and on top of every detail in her life. She was on top of her finances, her bills, and her appointments. When I took her to a doctor's appointment and they asked her what medication she was on, my mom could list every single medication, and believe me, there were a lot of them, how many times a day she took it, and what the medication was for. Healthcare providers always marveled at how cognitively sharp my mom was at 88. Even this last time in the hospital, she was reminding me to cancel a dentist appointment, reschedule another doctor's appointment, and telling me whose birthdays were coming up and asking if I could please call for her to wish them happy birthday. Family meant everything to my mom, and she loved gathering together with my family each Friday for Shabbat dinner. She repeatedly told me it was one of her greatest joys. As Danny shared, my mom was a people person. My mom carried out this concern about people through her professional life as a social worker, in her personal life, and through her volunteer activities. My mom was always the one to volunteer to make a meal for a family in need. My mom also donated to causes that were important to her and volunteered for them as well. Some of my earliest memories were going to volunteer meetings with my mom. My parents were pioneers in the Soviet Jewry movement in Cleveland, and in fact, when I was 4 years old, my picture appeared in the newspaper because my parents had taken me to a protest in downtown Cleveland. Last week in the hospital, my mom said she just wanted to be home, surrounded by her children, her grandchildren, and Rhonda. Rhonda, you were way more than her caregiver. Rhonda, you were a friend, a confidant, and truly an angel on earth. Rhonda shared with me that my mom was warm-hearted and kind and always put others before herself. She knew how much my mom loved her children and grandchildren and being at family gatherings. She shared that my mom was a pure joy and a wonderful person who exuded love and kindness. Rhonda told me my mom was like a second mom to her. Rhonda, you will always be an important part of our family, and we can't thank you enough for everything you did and the love and the kindness you put into caring for our mother. We love you. My mom was like a cat with 9 lives. Every time something came her way, she managed to beat it. And this last time in the hospital, I really believed she was somehow going to pull through. But sadly, that just wasn't the case. Her kidneys had had enough and decided it was time. My mom had an expression she loved to use, and that expression was, "I love you to pieces." Every day when I left the hospital, I told my mom, "Mom, I love you to pieces." To be honest, I never really understood what that expression meant. But I think I do now, because my heart feels like it's shattered into a zillion little pieces, and every single one of them loves you, Mom. Mom, I love you to pieces. After our dad passed away, I quickly grew to hate the phrase would have or would have, as in, oh man, he would have loved this, as well as the simple past tense. But alas, here I am again, speaking about one of the 2 people I have loved the most, finding it so difficult to put the ED on verbs. The pain I feel is immeasurable. There's a hole in my heart, and it's not one that you, my social worker mom, can guide me through, like you have with so many other things. You always listened without judgment, contemplated the situation, proposed thoughtful questions, gave sound advice, or helped guide me to a good decision. You encouraged me to be positive, even in a negative situation, teaching me that there is always something to be learned or gained. After my freshman year of college, I had a job lifeguarding and teaching swimming lessons at Camp Ramah in Canada. It rained the entire first month, and I didn't have many friends. It was a pretty miserable summer for me. I called my mom crying about halfway through the summer, telling her I wanted to quit and come home. We talked through it, and she encouraged me to stick it out, that someday, if nothing else, it could serve as a good example of having persevered and stuck with something when I really wanted to give up. And guess what? I have actually used that awful summer as an example in that way. Growing up, you always helped me with my stuff, practicing oral reports, making a diorama, typing my papers for me late at night. In 6th grade, you came up with a great election campaign gimmick for me. We stuck a small piece of masking tape on a stick of gum and labeled it, "Stick with Elisa." And yes, I won. We had a lot of fun together, you and I, Mom. A favorite memory of both of us is a mother-daughter trip we took to Costa Rica in 2004. We hiked through the cloud forest. My mom walked some above-the-trees bridges while I went ziplining. We learned about how coffee was produced and went to a frog museum. When I used to ask her about the trip, even though she was never a big drinker, she always mentioned how she liked and thought it was so cool that the swimming pool where we were staying had a swim-up bar. Mom, you were one popular lady, a social butterfly of sorts. You had a lot of friends, many for upwards of 50 years, some of whom are here today. But you always had room for others. There were very few places where you went and didn't run into someone you knew. You were always welcoming and genuinely interested in others, of course in us, your children and grandchildren, but also in our friends, colleagues and neighbors, new members of the family, and the international guests who I hosted over the years.
and your memory and ability to follow up on what someone had mentioned the last time you saw them was quite remarkable. You were also an introducer of people. In fact, you were once at an event where you knew two women. You introduced them to each other, only to find out that they were mother and daughter. Here are some things about Ieda that you may not have known. She really loved crime shows and used to stay up till the wee hours of the night watching her favorites and enjoyed the Law and Order marathons on the weekends. When I lived at home, we would watch Forensic Files episodes one after another. Her favorite these days was Blue Bloods, and she was a lifelong Jeopardy fan. And while, of course, Ieda was that kind, sweet, fun-loving, punny, cute, assertive, generous of spirit little lady we all know, she was not without some spunk in her engine. She was an avid tennis player for many years. While she was working at the JCC, she was, let's say, not so fond of her boss. She told me she found it useful to take her aggression out by naming the ball after her boss and then tossing it up in the air and smashing it over the net. Good therapy. If you've ever been at any social gathering with my parents, then you know they were always the last to leave. Likewise, you have also heard one of my mom's favorite sayings about goodbyes. The British leave without saying goodbye. The Yiddish say goodbye without leaving. Followed by, we're Yiddish. Well, Mom, you may have said goodbye, but you will never leave. You are part of me. There's so much of you in who I am. I will carry my memories of you and you in my heart forever. Last year, before you turned 88, when people asked you how old you were going to be, you replied, 88, like the number of keys on a piano. I heard you say it so many times that we made piano the theme of your little birthday celebration. Mom, I asked you multiple times, I'd love to throw you a big party, invite all your friends, family. What do you think? Nope. We'll have a big one for my 90th. I noticed much more in the past few years that you were very definite about what you wanted and what you didn't. Strong, which we have always known and observed. Oh, Mom, how I wish I could throw you that 90th birthday party. Like you said I could. How I wish the music you brought to all of our lives would have kept on playing for just a bit longer. But you decided it was time to rest. So, on that note, I will conclude these remarks the same way I have signed all the cards I've given you. Mom, I love you so much.
Now we're going to hear from some of the grandchildren. I think are they all coming up? All right, so we'll have Gabrielle, Matthew, Marin, Ari, Alana, Jonah, and Arjun.
I'm Gabrielle, Grammy's oldest grandchild, and I wanted to write a letter to my grandma to thank her for some of the things that she taught me. Dear Grammy, you had a knack for lingering over a cup of tea, and as an out-of-town grandchild, I always enjoyed a cup next to you, getting the chance to listen to the happenings in your very busy schedule and sharing with you the things I had going on in my life. You had the best advice, and I savored these conversations with you. Thank you for teaching me the importance of living in the moment, especially with the people that you love. In 2018, right after my college graduation, we flew to Dublin to meet Ilana after her semester abroad in Amsterdam. We walked miles through the city, baked scones and bread with a sweet Irish lady, and trekked up the very rocky cliffs of Moher. And you never missed a beat. You said, "Just hold my hand and I'll keep up with you because you girls will be dragging me along." Thank you for teaching me how to be adventurous even at 82. Many years ago, you added a Miriam's cup to our Seder table. I remember being excited about a new tradition that I had not learned about in school. And yet for you, it seemed like such an obvious addition, because obviously courageous women belong at our Seder. You had moxie in the things you did, family traditions and otherwise. Thank you for teaching me chutzpah and to stand up for what I believe in. I love you, Grammy.
One of my core memories with Grandma and Grandpa is our Shabbat dinners. Throughout my childhood, I remember going to their house every Friday night, and Grandma would cook up a feast, delicious chicken, rice, veggies, and more. I loved our Shabbat dinners with Grandma and Grandpa, and I looked forward to them every week. Over the years, these dinners transitioned to our place, and eventually both my mom and I got in on the cooking. When I moved back to Cleveland in 2019, we started having Grandma Ieda over for Shabbat dinners on a weekly basis, especially post-pandemic, and she really took a liking to both mine and my mom's cooking, especially our matzah meal chicken. It was a simple dish, really, coating chicken with matzah meal, but as an incredibly picky eater, it was one of the first chicken dishes I ever ate, and Grandma always got excited when I told her I was making it. Since I moved to Rochester, I haven't gotten to make it for her as often, but I've still gotten to come back home for my fair share of Shabbat dinners. Last July, we celebrated her 88th birthday, and I surprised her at Shabbat dinner with my girlfriend, Rachel. I will never forget the look on her face when she walked in and immediately realized who Rachel was without me even having to introduce her. She was beaming. The last time I spoke with Grandma, we were FaceTiming on Wednesday, and we started talking about Passover. I told her I was making chicken for the Seder, and she asked if I was making her favorite. I told her I was, and she said she was excited to have some. Unfortunately, Grandma won't be with us tomorrow night, but I'll be sure to save her a piece of matzah meal chicken. Love you, Grandma.
Hi, I'm Ilana. My phone's voicemail box is often full because I haven't deleted any of the voicemails from my grandma since May 2019. I knew there would come a day I'd want to listen to these messages over and over again. Unfortunately, the first two of these messages were 3-minute long butt dials with no words, just some muffled background noise, but that did make me laugh as I started to go through them. And it made me laugh even harder that there were 2 of them. The rest of the messages, though, are memories that I'm grateful I saved for yesterday. Grandma calling to wish me a Shana Tova in 2019. Grandma calling me to say Happy Valentine's Day in 2020. Grandma calling me again in 2020 to wish me a Shana Tova. But on this voicemail, she told me I'd baked a beautiful challah for dinner. She was actually referring to a picture I'd texted her 3 months earlier, but nevertheless, I'm glad the challah got her stamp of approval, even 3 months later. One of the next messages was Grandma calling me in 2021 to tell me she was excited to see me on Passover. This one was probably the hardest to listen to, as this will be our first Passover without her. Of course, I always called Grandma back, and these phone calls were just an extension of the time we spent together in person. I'm endlessly grateful that I moved back to Cleveland this past November and was able to spend more time with her, whether it was at Shabbat dinner, playing Scrabble, bringing groceries to her apartment, or even taking her to get a haircut that she didn't end up liking. After every time I saw Grandma, for as long as I can remember, she ended our interactions by saying, "You're very dear to me." I hope she knows she was so very dear to me, too. I love you, Grandma, and I miss you more than anything. I hope you have a wonderful Seder with Grandpa.
It's important to make an effort for the ones we love, and Grammy always did that. My sisters and I grew up in Providence, so whenever we got to see Grammy and Grandpa, it was a gift. One time, in preschool, when I was at the local JCC, they missed Grandparents' Day, but they had a scheduled trip coming. So when they got there, Grammy took me to the JCC on a Sunday and somehow got them to let us in to the preschool section, just the two of us, and we shared strawberry ice cream and danced to preschool songs. It's that kind of effort that I learned from her, and I can only imagine the amount of effort it took to open her eyes 2 nights ago. I'll always remember the strawberry ice cream with her, and I'll always remember the effort she made, and I'll always remember Grammy. Thank you.
Growing up, I was the only person in my home who liked fish. Not only that, but no one at home could even stand the smell of it. Because of this, I never got to eat fish with my immediate family. Lucky for me, Grandma Ieda also enjoyed fish. Whenever I wanted to have a fish dinner, I would call up my grandma. She was always happy to take me to one of her favorite restaurants or make me some delicious fish at home. These meals would never just be quick dinners, though. We would always spend time together, before or after, visiting a museum or sitting in her den and watching Jeopardy! At the time, I may have thought of all these dinners as just opportunities to eat fish, but looking back, I know I was making cherished memories with my grandma. During the pandemic, when seeing my grandma became harder, we still managed to find a time to have a fish dinner. We may have been sitting on opposite ends of the table, but we still ate fish together. When she was having health issues while I was in college, I would call her often, and we would talk about the next time we would see each other and have a fish dinner. Luckily, she got better, and we got to have that fish dinner. Over the past couple weeks, I was hoping my grandma would get better, and we could share another fish dinner. Sadly, that didn't happen, but the memories we made over these meals will last forever. I love you, Grandma.
Yesterday, my mom brought up the importance of holding multiple feelings at the same time. I know this past weekend, saying goodbye to Grammy, I've certainly felt both extremes of sadness and joy. But that's Grammy. She held so many truths at once. She was gentle and so strong. She was soft-spoken and a relentless self-advocate. She was complimentary and really honest. She was grounded and always the first person to celebrate. She was independent
and loved nothing more than being surrounded by family, friends, or complete strangers that would inevitably become a friend soon enough. She loved her leisure time, and when it came the time to fight for something, she never stopped. Grammy held multiple truths at once, and she held it all so gracefully. Most important of all, she held immense, unique love for each person in her life. What a strong person it takes to hold that much. She never failed to express how she was the lucky one for being able to love all of us. We were certainly the lucky ones, Grammy, and I already miss you. I love you.
Well, I didn't know her as long as the people next to me or the people down there. Through games of Scrabble and dinner at Brassica with her and walking through the halls, I can honestly say she was a very kind woman. I always felt part of her family, and I was very thankful for the time that I was able to be with her.
We read in the book of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born, a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. There is a Jewish tradition that teaches that everything that happens in its proper time, even though it may not seem that way to us. When we're confronted with the loss of a loved one, it never seems like the right time, even if they had a long and full life like Ieda Warshay. Although we cannot completely understand God's judgments, Ecclesiastes assures us that there is order and meaning in creation. As I mentioned earlier, since we are on the eve of Passover, the sages decreed that there should be no eulogies given, and in fact, this is the ruling, as I said, for the entire month of Nisan. While this may have been their decision, we understand that it is fitting to honor someone who was so dear to so many, a woman who was kind, intelligent, generous of spirit, loving, and who had a wonderful sense of humor. And so rather than an official eulogy, as I said before, I will offer some remarks that help us to better understand the words of Ecclesiastes. Ieda was born in Steubenville, Ohio in 1935 to Jacob and Sadie Bernstein. She was the middle child. There's an older brother, Paul, of blessed memory, and her younger brother, Lenny. Her parents owned a grocery store, and Ieda spent a lot of time there. In fact, she always had the skill of being able to tell what produce was the best. She could pick up a melon and know if it was the right one to buy. In her youth, she was a good student. She played the violin and piano. Although the Jewish community in Steubenville was small, she was active in young Judea. She knew that she was Jewish, and unfortunately, some of the other people in town reminded her of this in an unfriendly way. After graduating from high school, Ieda enrolled at The Ohio State University, where she excelled and earned her Bachelor of Science. She received several honors, including the Mortarboard Society, recognizing college seniors for their exemplary scholarship, leadership, and service. Ieda was also an active member of AE5. With her degree in hand, Ieda accepted a job in Detroit at the local JCC. This was already quite unusual for her generation. First, she attended university, and then she headed off to a city where she had never really spent any time in order to begin her career. While in Detroit, Ieda decided to take a trip to New York City. Before she departed, word got out to a Steubenville friend of Ieda's mother that she would be in the New York area. Sadie's friend, Ieda, had 2 nephews in New Jersey and suggested that Ieda should meet up with one or both of them. Ieda was not really interested, nor were apparently the brothers, Marvin and Lee Warshay. Somehow, both sides relented, and Marvin and Ieda agreed to a date. Interestingly, this would not be the first time that they had met. When they were young children, the brothers had come to Steubenville to visit their Aunt Ieda, and they all played together. In advance of their date, Marvin sent a crazy letter to Ieda, and she wondered what she was getting herself into. Their second meeting, after about 20 years, could not have gone more differently than the initial playdate. The two hit it off immediately. Ieda mentioned on that first evening that she enjoyed playing tennis. And so the next day, Marvin showed up with a couple of rackets, and they played tennis for their second date. It was a whirlwind romance, and within 2 months, they were engaged to be married. Before the wedding, Marvin came to Steubenville, and it created quite a stir. His Aunt Ieda insisted that Marvin stay with her family for the holiday. It was right before Rosh Hashanah. Marvin and Ieda would have none of that. They stayed with Ieda's parents, both of them. They were the talk of Jewish Steubenville that Yontif as Ieda showed off her New York fiancé. 6 months after their first date, they were married. Anyone who knew Ieda and Marvin understood that you really couldn't talk about one without talking about the other. They were a team. They were always together. Like Ieda, Marvin had a good sense of humor. Marvin loved to tell a good joke, and Ieda always laughed, even if she was the only one laughing. Marvin took a job with NASA, and they moved to Cleveland's west side so that he could be close to work. Around this time, Ieda went back to school and received a master's in social work. Their home was far from the center of the Jewish community here in Cleveland, so they eventually moved to the east side. Here they raised their children, Danny, Susan, and Elisa. The children, and eventually their spouses and her grandchildren, have already shared many of their memories, so I'm not going to repeat them here, but suffice to say that family was the center of her life, and she relished the time that they could all be together. Ieda focused on taking care of her children, but as soon as Elisa started kindergarten, she went back to work. For many years before this, Ieda was an active volunteer. But she began a job at the old JCC on Mayfield Road, working with older adults and with teens. She made wonderful friends with her coworkers in the back office. They referred to themselves as the kibbutz. Later, she took a position with Jewish Family Services in Akron, working with older adults. During this time, she wrote an advice column called Dear Ieda, to which people would address their questions and concerns, and she would write her answers. The dirty little secret, which I suppose can now be revealed, was that Ieda was the one actually asking the questions and answering them on her own. Outside of work and family, Ieda and Marvin had a huge community of friends around them. They hosted a Chevra Tarbut where they discussed Jewish culture. Marvin, as you heard, was a pioneer and leader in the Soviet Jewry movement. Ieda became involved in sisterhood at Park Synagogue and eventually became its president. She ran a bereavement support group for a while, and Park Synagogue honored her in 2004 with its Miriam's Cup Award. Of course, there was also an active social life with many friends welcomed into their home. Marvin and Ieda also enjoyed the symphony and subscribed to the pop series. They loved going to Blossom for concerts. The theater was also a big interest. Her favorite show was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which she saw 7 times. They also enjoyed going on boat rides, especially the Good Time 3. There was hardly a museum in town to which they did not maintain a membership. Family legend has it that Ieda may have joined the Maltz Museum within a half hour of its opening. They loved to travel near and far, sometimes to see friends or family who were just passing through or near Cleveland. No matter where she was, Ieda was always present, in the moment, and focused on the people she was with. This was something that I noticed the very first time that I met her at Beth El the Heights Synagogue on a Shabbat morning. And I really cherished it, as did anyone who was in her presence. The last 30 years brought their own challenges. Ieda was diagnosed with lupus nephritis as well as a circulatory issue, Raynaud's syndrome. Despite the challenges, she kept on fighting and living life on her own terms. This, of course, should come as little surprise. From her early years, she was assertive and took charge of her future. And she faced these diagnoses with that same spirit. Ieda's life was filled with many blessings. She was fortunate to share her life with a wonderful partner until Marvin's passing 7 years ago. Finding herself alone for the first time in a very long time, Ieda took over everything so that she could continue to live independently. She had an amazing strength, you could even call it moxie, that carried her and her loved ones through the tough times. Her intelligence and wisdom guided her and her family. As we heard in 2020, which was not a good year for anybody, Ieda sold her home and moved to the condo at Chelsea in September. A month later, she went in for what was supposed to be a relatively simple valve repair, but the recovery did not go as expected, and she was in and out of the hospital over the next few months until she had open heart surgery in December. Soon afterwards, she fractured a hip. Even so, she asked about when she would be able to drive again. Although she needed a walker to get around, she always kept a cane by the door because she was convinced that eventually she would no longer need the walker. Up until the very end, Ieda was always looking toward the future. And of course, as we heard just a few days ago, she was asking how she might be able to help the family with their preparations for Passover. And this was really not some kind of delusion on her part. She was very sharp until the end, but rather reflects the fact that so many times Ieda had been down, but she was definitely not out. This time, however, was different. As Ecclesiastes tells us, though, there is a time for everything. Ieda had a wonderful life with so many blessings, and there were hardships. Through it all, however, she always displayed a spirit of kindness, giving, humor, and love. She charted an independent future for herself when this was not often the case for women. And she leaves a legacy not only of her family, but her many good deeds that stand as a testament to her character. There is a time for everything, and now is a time to say goodbye. Although Shiva is greatly abbreviated, the coming days, weeks, and months will be a time for reflection and remembering. There are so many wonderful things about Ieda that touched all of us who knew her. It is up to us to take this time to recall these and to commit to making them a part of our own lives as well. In doing so, we can help to ensure that Ieda Warshay's soul will be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Dei Zichrona Baruch, may her memory always be a blessing. On behalf of the family, I would like to express their appreciation for your presence here during this difficult hour. Not only difficult because we're mourning the loss of someone who meant so much to us, but also so very close to the holiday. And we also appreciate the many who could not be here today, who I know are streaming and are watching us. Please know that your presence is felt. Just as Ieda impacted all of our lives, we know that each of us touched her and enriched her and her family as well. In particular, the family is grateful, as Susan mentioned, beyond words, to Ieda's caregiver and friend, Rhonda. On behalf of everyone in the community, we extend our condolences to Ieda's children, Danny and Deborah, to Susan and Jay, to Elisa and Benamra, to grandchildren Gabrielle, Matthew, Marin, Ari, Alana, Jonah, and Arjun, to her brother Lenny, and to the rest of the family and the community. We wish you all Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch Shar Avelei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted together with all others among our people who are in mourning. And we say, Amen. We're going to conclude the service here at the funeral home with the recitation of the Elo HaSlichot prayer, because it is during the month of Nisan. We do not recite the regular memorial prayer, the Amalei Rachamim, but rather the Elo HaSlichot prayer, after which we'll call on the pallbearers and we'll continue with the service, heading out to the cemetery for burial. At this time, we ask all who are able to please rise for the recitation of the Elo HaSlichot. You'll do first in Hebrew and I'll do it in English? You want me to do it? Do you have the card that I gave you? Elo HaSlichot, Chanun Verachum, Erech Apayim Verav Chesed, Hamsei Chaprat Pesha Vakrabat Yesha Mnucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utehorim Kzorakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Chaya Bat Yaakov HaKohen VeEsther, Shalcha LeOlama, Ana Bal HaRachamim, Zochra La Letova Kol Zchuyoteha B'tzidkoteha B'artzot HaChayim, Uvtach La Sharei Tzedek Ve'ora, Sharei Chemla V'chanina, B'seiter Kenafecha Hastireha LeOlamim, Utzror B'tzror Chayim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tanuach B'shalom Al Mishkava, V'nomar, Amen. O God, who is full of forgiveness, who is compassionate and caring, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Ieda Warshay, who has gone to her eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that she performed in the land of the living. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is her portion. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Amen. You can be seated momentarily. Do you want to do the miktam? And we'll call on the pallbearers. We'll ask those who are able to please rise again as the casket is brought to the hearse. Miktam LeDavid, Shomreini El, Kipisiti Fach, Amart Ladonai Adonai Ata, Tovati Balalecha, Litoshim Asher Ba'aretzema, Vadirecho Chepsivam, Yeru Atzvotam, Achar Maharu, Abal Tasif, Niskehem Mudam, Ubal Esef Notam, Asfatai, Adonai Menachal,
Those going to the cemetery with the family, please step to your card, start the card, turn on your headlights manually. This time you can exit to the rear or the front of the chapel, please.